Wigglytuff, my favorite aggro deck from early Pokemon, showing up here in the base rocket format in maybe its most aggressive form. Wiggly Sneak Attack truly looks to dominate your opponent on turn 2. The deck is extremely straightforward, it's easy to use, easy to build, and honestly doesn't need much explanation as long as you're already familiar with Jungle Wigglytuff. So let's just go ahead and get into the build. So let's just start with a full play set of Jigglypuff. 60 HP is pretty solid for a basic Pokemon, plus guaranteed sleep off of 1 energy if you ever need to stall for an extra turn very early game. Resistance to Psychic doesn't hurt since Mewtwo and Mr. Mime were everywhere. Followed up by a full playset of Wigglytuff, which boasts a lot of the same merits. Decently high HP at 80. An attack that is a guaranteed sleep if you're having trouble getting that double colorless energy attached and you need to stall an extra turn. Psychic resistance and the ability to deal 60 damage on turn 2 if played correctly, even more than 60 with the help of plus power, which is enough to knock out pretty much any basic Pokemon that isn't named Chansey, Kangaskhan, or Lickitung on the same turn that you're evolving into Wigglytuff, which is usually going to be turn 2 or 3. Full playset of Scyther that is in this deck purely so you don't have to mulligan a bunch of times. You can start the game with a Scyther, draw into Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff, and get a free retreat off of it so you're not wasting any energy. Yes, it can be a help against Hitmonchan, it can be its own independent attacker, but that's really not why it's in the deck. Running 1 copy of Mankey and 1 copy of Rocket Rattata, using Peek and Trickery together, you can look at a prize card if it's something you need, get it into your deck, but even more frequently you're going to be using Mankey's Peek in order to look at the top card of your opponent's deck, which will allow you to know what they're about to top draw into, and if it's something you don't want them to have, try to force a shuffle. This deck is looking at a whole lot of draw between a full playset of Bill and a full playset of Oak. You don't necessarily have to use all of them, but they're good resources to have so that you can burn through as much of your deck as you need to get your full setup as early as possible, potentially win the game on turn 2. In addition to the draw power, there's also going to be plenty of search power, full playset of Computer Search. Again, this is not a card you're going to be using all 4 copies of, but you do want it available as quickly as possible, thus full playset. And then we have the sneaky part of the deck with Rocket Sneak Attack. Earlier when I was talking about Mankey's Peek and forcing your opponent to shuffle if you don't like what their top draw is, Rocket Sneak Attack is the method for doing that. Not only are you getting rid of a trainer from their hand that you don't want them to be able to play, you're also limiting what they're going to be able to draw on your next turn, or at least controlling it to the best of your ability. A few copies of Imposter Oak's Revenge for if your opponent does start to get a little bit of card advantage over you, or if you end up having to go through a couple mulligans at the start of the game trying to get a basic, your opponent draws a little bit, giving them a little bit more of an advantage that you don't like. You can hit them with an Imposter Oak's Revenge on your first turn as long as you're able to draw into it. With as much draw and search power that exists in this deck, you're going to have access to as many sneak attacks, Professor Oak's Revenge, energy removal, gust of wind, goop gas as you want, as you need. The point of this deck is to use as many disruption trainers as you need to get those trainers into your hand as early as possible, because you're probably going to be up against Dark Vileplume. So you might as well get all of your trainers out early anyway. Ruin your opponent's hand, ruin their setup, discard whatever energy they attach, knock the trainers out of their hand, and ideally turn 2, slap down a Wigglytuff, attach a double colorless energy, and just deal a ton of damage with Do the Wave, and as many plus powers as you needed to draw for the knockout. Goop Gas is mainly in here for those matchups against power heavy decks. That way, if you know what's coming on the next turn, you can go ahead and play a Goop Gas, and you can do that for your 2 opening turns to try to prevent as much Pokemon power shenanigans going on as possible, because again, the point of this deck is to control your opponent's first couple turns while you pass a couple of perfect turns and just steamroll your opponent with Do the Wave. 2 copies of Item Finder and 2 copies of Nightly Garbage Run for recycling purposes. You are going to be drawing a lot of cards, probably also discarding a lot of cards with Computer Search. If you need to get some of those back, you've got options. A couple of Grass Energy for if you do need to attack with Scyther, or if you just happen to be up against Pokemon that is weak to grass, so that will be very rare in this metagame. And then since special conditions are so prevalent with the addition of the Rocket set, full playset of full heal energy, and a full playset of double colorless. And that is the deck. You spend your early game drawing as many cards as you need to, getting those rocket sneak attacks out as early as possible. Get a look at your opponent's hand, get rid of some cards that they need, take a peek at the top card of their deck, see if that's going to be useful to them, and if so, force a shuffle. Do the best you can to limit what they can do. Dark Vileplume can be a problem for this deck because those decks are also trying to drop Dark Vileplume on turn 2 and trainer lock the game. So if your opponent goes first and you just start with an abysmal hand, you could lose out in the momentum game, but even if you have to start with a Rattata or a Mankey, both of those cards have free retreat like Scyther, and there's so much draw and search power in this deck that it's almost impossible not to get that momentum back. Even if you do go second with a bad hand, you can at least Bill or Oak into a more favorable hand that's just going to get you more and more cards, let you get everything you need down on the field before that Vileplume actually hits it. The more difficult matchup tends to be against bulky, slow and steady decks that are built to work around aggro. And this can include other Wigglytuff decks that are utilizing the big basics like Lickitung, Chansey, and Kangaskhan, not just as utility cards, but to stall and heal and completely circumvent what a super aggro Wigglytuff deck is trying to accomplish. It sounds so weird to say, but if you want more control, run more Mankey. You can use more than one peek per turn, so if you want to look at the top card of your opponent's deck, you can use a secondary peek to combo off of that Rocket Rattata, or just have more information than your opponent on what's actually in their prizes. Rather than running 2 copies of Goop Gas Attack, if you're running into a lot of Pokemon Power based decks, you could just run a 1/1 line of Muck. But that's a little more complicated, slows the deck down a little bit, because remember, you're trying to win turn 2 or 3, so it's up to you and your play style to decide how important it is to shut down powers that early in the game. And I reckon that's going to be it for this deck. You know I love Wigglytuff. It's one of those decks that stayed at the top of the metagame for every single format it was a part of. So if you want to see more do the wave style decks, there are a bunch of them on the channel already. I thought it would be a huge miss to not have the base Rocket version on there, since it is one of the most powerful versions of Wigglytuff. As always, toss your thoughts down in the comments section. Let me know what other types of content you'd like to see on the channel. Let me know your favorite versions of Do the Wave. Social media links are in the description, and I will see you next video.